Hello, listeners of the Art Versations podcast. Welcome back to another Art Versations, a meditative conversation about the artistic process. How are you feeling today? Have you been able to take some time for your health and peace of mind? This is Bri, like the cheese, checking in and thanking you for joining me. Let's stay connected. If you're listening on Spotify, leave an answer on the community question asking, how do you allow space for change in your artistic process? Someone who has helped remind me to allow space for change in a multitude of ways is the wonderful Charlene Dinger. Charlene is a multifaceted movement facilitator and the host/creator of the Compassionate Creative podcast. Sitting down with her was much, much overdue. As teaching colleagues, we've kind of always discussed art in like quick spurts while passing each other in the studio, so I feel super lucky to have had this long-form chat with her. After tuning in, go listen to her fantastic podcast. It's linked in the description, so there's really no excuse. But before you go, stay here. Join me for my chat with Charlene Dinger.
It's everything that we just talked about is like leaving the space for that. Mm-hmm. I think that's the name of the episode, actually. Yeah. Like there's something around that.
Totally. Yes. That's the quote.
It's a great question.
Hi, Charlene.
Hi, Bri.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. We're both hosts. I feel like we're both doing that.
I know. I'm going to try and be the guest.
Okay.
I'm going to try and really step back and be the guest today. Yeah.
It's hard to like talk about yourself, I feel like, when you're used to always like engaging with others.
And asking people about themselves too. But yeah, I've done a few interviews where I have been the guest, and so it never gets less strange. Amazing. To be on that side of the mic, so to speak. Yeah. It's
a certain skill though to like be able to find questions for someone else, especially if you don't know them.
Yes.
Like when you were telling me before about like having guests on that you've never met before, like you need to have that like prior conversation.
Yes. I always try and do that. I always try and have like a 5-10 minute just like quick chat. We can see there's usually a vibe, like it usually works out, but just to kind of see where they're at, if there's anything again that they want to talk about, if there's anything in particular that is like coming up for them that they really want to touch upon, and just to get that sense of each other. So I think it is important, and it is definitely harder if you don't know them. But I think it's all about listening.
Yes.
Like it's really just about listening and being as open as possible to that conversation, that free conversation. And you know, as the host and as the guest, it's like, it's, you got to listen, right? Absolutely. Rather than kind of coming in with this, like, you can like it does work for some conversations, but I think you know if it's just not as it's so rigid sometimes, and so I think it's just like let's just chat, like let's just have a conversation and get to know each other.
Yes.
But then there is something about podcasting and kind of knowing that there's this like goal of really sharing substance, right? And that I think as long as both people are kind of coming into it with that intention, then you're going to get some really great gems, right? Some really nice like talking points and interesting things. So
being able to bounce off each other and like meet each other halfway.
Yes.
I think that's so interesting to listen to.
Yeah.
Like when I'm a consumer of podcasts.
Yeah. Yeah, always.
I mean, there are the podcasts that work of just having one person.
Yep.
Depending on like, I think a lot of comedians can handle that because it's like you're literally shouting to no one.
Totally.
Like you're shouting out into the void.
Totally.
So you have to be animated. You have to be like, you have to have content readily available to like speak about.
Yes. Yeah. And be confident in that and be comfortable with that. So the way that I've kind of played around with the podcast is like, I do a guest episode and then I do the week after, I'll do what I call like a free flow Friday.
Yes. Your podcast, Compassionate Creative Podcast.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I love that we just jumped into like podcasting because we both love it so much.
We do.
So I've kind of played around with this idea of like, okay, well, I started with releasing a guest episode every other week. And then more so, it started with more so just like the purpose of creating more content and just like being a little bit more consistent. And I was like, okay, but do I want to do a guest every week or can I just fill that with like myself? Am I interesting enough to just do this by myself?
Right.
And I just kind of was like, okay, well, I'll just talk about whatever I want. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be about creativity. It doesn't have to be about dance or art or yoga or whatever.
Yeah.
It can just be about anything that is like flowing from me that has come up that week. It can be 5 minutes, it can be 10 minutes, it can be 45 minutes, like whatever it ends up being.
Yeah.
And that's been pretty cool. Like that's been a good way of sort of filling that. And also I feel like too, when I'm interviewing somebody, it's such a focus on them, obviously. Right. And I got feedback from people that they were like, we would really love to hear more of like what you have to say or more of what your thoughts are on such and such. So I was like, okay, well, that's a good way to do it. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, because they want to know, like, of course, about your guest each time. But if they've never met you, then it's nice to have those like 10-minute episodes every Friday or so that like we get to know the host a little bit more. That's really cool. I'm curious too about like letting yourself have those moments of being just free flow in your thoughts. And like, I'm sure you plan a little bit of it, but from what I've listened, it's very like spur of the moment, stream of consciousness, that feeling. Like how's that been for your like outward expression?
It's really, it's a form of therapy for me, like straight up. I sometimes feel like, is this like a selfish thing for me? But I'm like, no, like, I don't think so. This is what I need. This is what I need to be able to express that. Yeah. It's a space for me to just, connect to myself and just kind of, I'm not a journaler. Like it's something I know that I always am like, I know this is good. Like I know a lot of people do it. It's, and I love writing, but journaling I've never made it like a consistent thing.
Gotcha.
And so I feel like this is sort of my outlet as like a journaling type of thing.
Yeah.
I will make like a couple notes for myself if there are important points that come up that I'm like, oh, this is something I really want to say. But I'll sort of make it like a little point form type thing and then just kind of flow off of that. And it really just depends. Like there'll be some weeks where I'm like, I have no idea what I want to talk about. I don't know. I have no idea what's coming up, what's going on outside, like what's going on. The last one I think I did was like about the summer solstice. But then on that day was when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And I was like, okay, well, how do I integrate that in with what I've already sort of planned? Right. Do I just like throw all of this out and, talk about this only? And so it's really just like what's coming up, what's coming up for me.
Yeah.
What am I feeling? What am I observing? And like I said, sometimes it ends up just being like, sometimes I'll do a meditation.
Great. Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes I'll do a meditation.
If that's what's needed at
exactly,
that time. Yeah.
Where it's like, I'm like, okay, there isn't really anything that I personally want to share right now, but maybe people just need like a meditation. Let's all just share this space together. Yeah. I'll just guide it. 5 minutes. then it's always there.
Right.
Then it's always something that you can access. You can come back to it. If there's something I want to promote, like that, the 21-day yoga journey challenge that I was doing.
Yes.
That was like one of the things that I talked about. So it really just depends. And again, I feel like it's just giving yourself that space to be open to it, to be receptive to and aware of what's going on around me. and just kind of allowing that to sort of filter through. And if people want to listen to it, they'll listen to it. And if not, they'll, listen to a guest episode. But
it's good to have both, I feel like.
Yeah.
I think of like other podcasters like Armchair Expert or something where like they use their umbrella of content now.
Yes.
Like they don't just have Dax and Monica speaking to a guest. Like they have Armchair and Dangerous, like lots of other slightly smaller scale little pieces of content, which in itself like creates such a great palette for listeners to kind of pick and choose, right?
Yes.
Like I think that's really interesting that you found, your default regular let's have a guest on.
Yeah.
That works, but then adding on this extra little bit, like when I listen in, I'm like, oh great, like this will just be it's like a little snack of you.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's such a good way to describe it. And it's funny because I'm glad we're having this conversation now because it's in my mind. I was thinking about dropping them.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, tell me the tea.
I was thinking about dropping them because I was just like, am I interesting in like is anybody even like is anybody even like connecting to this like right?
They're coming in, yeah.
Is it worth it? Like is it, or should I just stick with like the guests and start releasing these guest episodes every week? And I've been back and forth with it. I'm like, is it actually more work for me to do these Free Flow Fridays? All the things.
For sure.
All of the things it's been like kind of stirring around. But now that we just had this conversation, I feel like they're there for a reason.
Yes, I think so.
They're totally there.
Yeah, but I know what you mean about like evolving your platform too. Like, maybe some days you don't want to do it, or maybe you take like a 6-month hiatus from it.
Yeah.
Totally okay, because it's up to you. You have that creative control.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like it's important, especially when we're trying to talk about our own processes in our episodes. Like with mine, it's very much about like the creative process. So I literally am changing my process like every episode.
Yeah.
But that's allowed. That is okay as an artist, as a creative. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're a human being also.
Exactly.
Like let's
there you go.
Let's remember that.
That's the tagline.
Yeah. I had an interesting conversation with a guest recently, and he was speaking about, these like five core elements that, he sort of started, and things that he wanted to tap into in order to have a successful, happy life. And he was like, those 5 core elements that I started with have shifted many times over the years. And that's okay. Like, that's part of being a human being. It's part of growth. It's part of your evolution. You can change your mind. As you shift and as people come and go and as you grow and evolve, like your core being, like your morals, your values, like they're going to change. They're going to shift. So that's okay. And I think being okay with that is like a huge part of that growth and allowing the space for that. I feel like that's something that I'm really saying a lot lately, is like just allowing for space. Whether it's within like my yoga teaching with the kids. For sure. Yes. Yeah. It's like all of those places, like there needs to be space for that growth and that change. So taking the rigidity out of everything, like has to be like this. This is, these are the systems that have been put onto us. And now I'm just like, fuck all y'all. Like, all of these systems need to go because none of them are working for us.
Absolutely. Yep.
So
having that time to recoup and reflect on what you need too, like I think you wouldn't have, I'm assuming you wouldn't have come to this conclusion if there wasn't a lot of condensed space in your life. Like I'm assuming that like something came up where you felt like claustrophobic, which as an artist, like we can't do that. We can't like box ourselves in because that's when like the worst stale, uninspiring pieces of art like come out of.
And absolutely.
Because those external factors are so hard to dismantle as one person, I'm trying to like live within them, but also recognize like they're not working for me. I need time, I need rest, I need change. And that and within space comes opportunities for change.
Absolutely. And these again, like these systems are built in a way that, you know, you are told like, well, you have to go to school and get a degree though. Like you need something to fall back onto because your art is not going to sustain you, right? We are fed these messages and it's like, well, no, actually art and creativity and people like us is exactly what the world needs and exactly what the world like revolves around. Right? Is creatives making things, putting things out, inspiring, and you know, we need to start to kind of dissolve these ideas of these systems holding us in, which is like a whole full podcast conversation to go into.
We've had many talks going when we're working together. I feel like it always kind of comes up in our talks, like about how the external is infecting the internal, and yeah, I mean, we ended up with, like, sometimes like we'll just have to stop our conversation because it's going on for way too long. Like there's so much to unpack. And, but I think at least we're having these conversations and recognizing that there is an issue about how our society revolves a lot around hustle and like, if you're an artist, you're probably going to be starving and broke and blah, blah, blah. Like
there's that mentality around that. Right. But it's good. It's good to be having those conversations. And I think the biggest thing is like normalizing rest. Normalizing that time that you have to give yourself, right? It's like the whole like hustle culture it's not a thing. Like it's not a thing anymore. It can't be, otherwise we're gonna be human doings, right? Like we're human beings, we're not human doings, and we're not machines, and that doesn't allow for that sense of play.
Absolutely.
And that sense of, again, that space for play in order to let creativity come through and flow.
So important.
It really is. And I think like it's time that we start recognizing that and allowing for that. We got to pay our bills, like obviously, but again, that's just another thing that the systems put onto us. Oh my gosh, we could just go. I'm just like, all of the things. So
there's a frustration too around it, because I think like what we can do is use our voice and speak about it. So, but at some point, that's all we can do, unfortunately. I mean, yes, there's so many opportunities for change, and I think again, it happens not just with one person, but with a group. But I feel like the one thing that I have is my voice and how I use it. And, you know, yes, it's a podcast about art, but I feel like I always end up talking about how the external fits into the internal. Because art is evolving like us.
But that's what art is. Like, art is life. Life is art, right? And so it's, and I always say this too, it's like, I've created this compassionate creative, and I talk to creatives on the podcast, but everyone is creative in some way, shape, or form, whatever it is that you're doing. And whether you are tapping into that and then putting, paintings out, putting dance out, whatever, or you are, or you're using your creativity within your realm, like you're a surgeon. This came up the other, like a surgeon has to be creative and think on their feet and come up with different ways to save that life if that one way isn't working, right? So it's like we all have that within us, and so that's life, right? Absolutely. Like everything around you is some way, shape of art. So I don't think one exists without the other, and it's like my podcast is about art, so your podcast is about life and how and how they go together. So I think having these platforms and giving platforms to other artists and other creatives to be able to share is so important, because as artists we need to stick together, and we need to come together, collaborate, uplift, so that these systems don't come, crashing down on everybody. Like the world needs us, especially right now. The world needs us to be using our voices and using our platforms and using our art to send out those messages that, like, you're not alone. We are really all in this together. And, there's a shift happening right now that I don't know if you're feeling it at all, but I was just teaching a yoga class, and this lady was quite emotional through the class and after the class. And, she was just like, I'm just feeling so grateful. Like, it feels like there's lots of changes happening right now. I think one of her children just graduated, like moving into high school. Like, and I was like, this is all part of it, like there has to be a sense of grief when change happens. And that's happening right now. It's like a new moon in Cancer, and we're in this summer solstice, very highly charged time energetically, renewal, restoring, changing, letting go of things. That's always what these times are about. And I think, like, collectively we're feeling that. Look at what is happening in the States, but, like, people all over the world are pissed, and are uprising. And so we're starting to connect more on these things that mean something to us, right? Collectively as human beings.
Because we have each other.
Exactly.
At the end of the day.
Exactly.
The people, the public, we band together.
That's it.
When we're standing up against higher ups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, we have all of the resources now. Like, our ancestors did not have all of the tools, all of the skills, all of the resources that we have now.
Yes.
And so, like, what are we going to do with that?
How can we stay connected?
Exactly.
Even though they want to tear us apart and put us in our boxes. Yeah.
And that's where it comes back to, like, using your voice, using your platform, and really standing in that and understanding that as an artist, as a creative, like, that is part of your job. That is part of your duty.
Yes.
To use that. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's an important reminder for myself, and I think a lot of people can relate to that, even if you're not an artist.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you said too, like you have people on for your podcast that are not just like one kind of artist, or like, I think you use the word creative. I feel like that's such a broad vocabulary for like who you can have on. Like, I'm curious to know, like, how you curate that lineup. Like, do you want it to feel very like up and down about who you have on, or is there like a growth that goes like in a crescendo almost, or is it kind of spontaneous? Like, oh,
that's a good question. I don't necessarily plan it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't necessarily plan it. And at first, obviously, when I was starting, it was, okay, who's like in my circle?
Right.
So there was a lot of dancers in the first season. I think everyone actually on that first season is a dancer. Then I started to realize, like, okay, that's awesome. That's really, really good. But how do I start expanding outside of that and getting different makeup artists, like, visual artists. I had someone on that is like a psychotherapist, but works through, with lots of creatives and kind of works on like, okay, so what's blocking you here? So like kind of like the psychology behind creativity.
Amazing. Yeah.
And then that kind of started just stemming from there. And I take recommendations, like, people that I connect with. And I'm like, okay, you like, let's have a chat. Let's just have a conversation. And then in order for me to start reaching outside of that circle, I started using like different platforms to connect me with different people. Yeah. And then it just opened everything up. Obviously I'll sift through, like, if I've had some people that have more of like a business background, and then how do we tie that into, how this can help creatives. I recently had somebody on that is a communication expert and talks a lot about public speaking, how to communicate better in order to gain more clients. And I was like, okay, well, how can this help creatives then, right? And like, how does that help you, with the grant proposal? How does that help you with like small talk at these like parties where, you're like, okay, I need to like chat it up with some of these like donors and patrons of this particular body. And so, it's been an interesting journey. I really try to amplify people of color, female identifying. Like, I think those are the voices that we need to hear right now. So not that it's like, oh, that's I'm only inviting people on, but if, I try and look for that first to give them a platform. But it's really just about who I connect with and who I feel like, people are going to want to listen to, people will connect with as well. And it just kind of goes from there. Yeah. And I'll try to bring in obviously like the creativity aspect of it, but then there's also this aspect of, okay, how are you integrating like compassion into your work? How do you work from a place of authenticity? Where is the integrity in your work? Those are the people that I'm amplifying and connecting with. Yeah, you always have
that question at the end of each episode. And I feel like, it's a big one, especially because we're talking about community and talking about being together.
Yes.
As people and as a public, we have to be compassionate, or else, like, I think of it as like, selfish making of art then if you're not being compassionate. But it's something that I think a lot of creatives should ask themselves to check in with, who am I doing this for? How is it being perceived? How am I communicating properly with my audience, with my the consumers of the art? And I think I this is something that I like really appreciated about listening into your episodes, because it didn't feel like one of those podcasts where they're just there to like promote something or promote them. It starts to become, again, like this exchange of like, we're having a conversation, meeting each other halfway. We need to be compassionate. Or else it's not good content, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important question that I appreciate that you bring up in each episode. And to see how different people respond to it.
Yeah. And I tend not to let people know what it is. And I just like some people, they'll listen to a couple episodes so they get an idea of what's going on. But if they haven't, they're like, oh,
And then take a second.
I need to actually think about that. And I love that. That's like my favorite reaction.
A reflection moment.
Because then it's like, it's right in the moment. Like you actually have to think about, you know, what it is you're doing for yourself. And I always kind of circle back to it because I'm like, well, that's why I ask you in the beginning, like, what are you doing for yourself? Because you can't work from an empty cup. Like you need to have your cup filled up before you then go out into the world and start giving of yourself through your work.
I feel like this is a good segue into, you know, talking about rest and restoration. So yeah, your yoga practice is so much about like making sure that we have space to rest and to reflect. I recently did your 21-day challenge, the home series. Oh my gosh. I mean, I've told you many times, but I feel like this was it was in March, which was a very, like, we had kind of just come out of the January lockdown and like still kind of settling back into like our routines. And I wanted to find something for myself to like, kind of like a journaling, kind of like a meditating practice, but like with movement. And it was so needed at that time for my body, for my mind. And I'm not someone who can like do yoga regularly.
Right.
And I definitely didn't do it for every 21 day, but like just when I had time, and it's all on demand too, which is great. Like it's on YouTube.
Yes.
So people can come and check it out. I want to hear a little bit though more about your yoga practice and how, you know, you make your method for you and for others.
Something that I'm constantly exploring. I just want to acknowledge like that you did that 21 days and that was
took me about 30, but you know.
And that was the whole point. Like it was like, and again, it's like, it's there anytime you want to do it. It's just about making the commitment to yourself and just showing up for yourself, whatever that looks like. And I feel like that is, very much the sort of, I suppose, cornerstone, which is funny because that's where we work together.
Shout out to Lauren and Caitlin.
Shout out to Cornerstone Studio. That's very much like a pillar of what I want my yoga space to feel like. Show up as you are, come as you are, whatever it looks like for you is absolutely fine. So I suppose that sort of is like what I'm working on as a teacher, as a student with my yoga practices. Yoga was introduced to me through one of my old students' moms.
Okay.
And, you know, she was like, you should come try this. It was like when hot yoga started to be like a really big thing. And she was like, come try this yoga class with me. And I was like, oh, that's gonna be easy. Like I'm, you know, like I have this background, like I'm gonna kill it. It's gonna, you know, I'm so flexible. This is gonna make me super skinny. Like such a that was like time. That was it. Like that was what I was going into it with. And it was a hot class. I didn't make it through. Like I was dying.
Wow.
Yep. And had to step out of the room, you know, that whole thing. And I was like, I need this. Like, I know that I need this. And that's sort of where the like addiction, so to speak, started. And it was very much about the physical practice in the beginning. I liked the sweat. I liked, you know, the feeling of like flushing and just like moving in a hot space. I really liked that. And then once I started to get more connected to what yoga actually is, that's where like really and truly the addiction started. Because and then it just became something that like I had to have it. I needed it to be part of my life.
Of all the addictions, that's definitely the one.
Right? Yeah. I'm like, this is a pretty good one to have.
It's a good advice.
And, you know, along the way and along the journey, it's just been like so many different teachers that have, you know, just inspired me to keep exploring. I think that's the biggest thing is this like continuous exploration as a student, especially. And, you know, for many, many years, I had people being like, you got to go do your teacher training. Like, you'd be so good. You'd be so good. And I just never felt ready for it. I don't know if it was because I was teaching so much dance and I was like, I don't have time. Like, I just want this to be my practice where I'm not thinking about teaching it. And then when I knew it was time, I just knew it was time. Like, it just felt it was right. And I did my yoga teacher training, and, you know, I just remain a curious student. And I think that that's the best way to show up as a teacher.
Yes.
I'm learning a lot through these various teachers that are really putting out the messaging of like really understanding that, you know, it's we need to come back to like what the roots of yoga are. I think yoga has just become this incredibly whitewashed, you know, thing. Yeah. And you know, it needs to be accessible. Everybody, no matter your age, your race, your gender, your spiritual beliefs, everyone should have access to mindful movement, to someone that can help you connect to your breath, to someone that can help you, you know, just connect to yourself.
Yes.
And that's where I come in as a teacher that is just trying to give people space.
And yeah, it feels like within the 21 days, like it's so universal that you can work with it however you need at that time. Like, and some days, like, I wouldn't follow you and I would just sit in a pose that felt right for me.
Yeah.
And I guess, like, also having that barrier of not being in a live class, like, it really can be for that person. But I imagine, too, in your classes, you know, live classes in person with people, like, you bring out lots of different options for others.
I try to.
Right? Like, having those modifications,
really try to.
so important, especially when you're talking about everybody.
Yes.
Like, you know, I'm trying to implement that in my teaching practice too, like having those modifications, those different stepping stones, so that if I do have a student who's coming in feeling like today just isn't the day, or hesitant about like trying new things and finding the like internal practice, then they feel more supported and more comfortable to take risks.
Yeah.
I think that's so needed.
Yeah. And it's really important work. Like it is really important work coming in as a teacher into any space. Like when people are coming to you, it's like this duty that we have, right? To create those safe spaces. And the lady that was feeling emotional in my yoga class today, like we were in the middle of like, you know, like the kind of peak like flow. And I just kind of looked over and she was sitting, taking breaths. And I was like, this is the most beautiful thing. Because she felt safe enough to do that. And she felt safe enough to know that there's no right or wrong. Like, you know, I'm here to just like guide this, you know, in this capacity, like in this particular space. And today we played with like an arm balance, you know, and it was just when I was like, okay, we're playing a game now, you know, we're going to try this. Lots of different options, lots of different, and it was just about trying. It was just about playing and noticing where like, okay, like, is it this fear of falling forward? Is it that, you know, you want to like get into it too fast, and like just meeting yourself where you're at. Like there's so many different components. And so, that's the goal is to just make everyone feel welcome. That was why I sort of took to like the YouTube space as well. because it's free.
It's great. It's so accessible. Yeah.
It's so accessible.
Yeah.
You can do it anywhere. You can do it anytime. Yeah. You can stop. You can come back to it. If there's a favorite practice that you have, if you know that like your hips need some love, there's something for you. If you know that you just need a meditation, there's something for you. And that was the idea behind creating that, because I was just like, well, you know, not everyone can afford to go to a yoga studio.
Yes.
Not everybody can afford to drop $70 to $100 on a fancy yoga mat. And that's not what it's about.
Right.
You know, like you should be able to do it in your living room.
Bare bones.
Exactly. Like it's not about anything other than
it's not the superficial
showing up.
Yeah.
So
that's where it starts to become very whitewashed and like, do you have your Lululemon leggings?
Yes.
And like, you know, no hate on Lululemon, but I think there's a real fine line about like when does this become a trend and something that looks so amazing on the outside, and then people forget that it's actually a practice and that it is messy and it will be about trying and erring and you know all of that class method that I think so many adults need to get back to, especially coming out of the pandemic and being inside.
Yeah.
How do we come back into class together?
Yes. Yeah.
Without feeling like we have to impress each other.
Well, it's interesting because I do think that there has been a shift now.
Yeah.
Dance was different.
Yeah.
Dance is next to impossible over Zoom.
Yeah.
But yoga, I do feel like there is like a whole new world now where people were like, oh, well, I can go and take a class from a teacher in Toronto, but I'm in Oakville, you know, and I can still do that, you know? And so there's like this accessibility now.
Yes.
That I think a lot of studios now, it's like when I go and teach a live class, if someone is taking it online, it's a hybrid class. And I think that's here to stay.
Yeah.
Because it is so accessible.
Yes.
But yeah, it's interesting because I know that you had mentioned like the New Leaf Foundation and these different like trainings that I've done, because I feel like this is a good way to kind of go into that. If you like Google yoga beauty, white skinny women in tight leggings and bra tops are the only images that are going to come up.
Yeah, it's so superficial.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
So that was something that really was very eye-opening to me. You know, I think the catalyst for it was the summer of George Floyd and just this like huge awakening around all of this like systemic racism, just the huge like can of worms was opened, and it was like you cannot not acknowledge this now and so in the yoga spaces, like all of these things like really just were amplified. And there was like, you know, for me anyways, there was like a really big awakening around how these processes, like the roots of yoga, you know, were just like taken by Western civilization and it's just like exploded into this like
among many things,
right?
Yeah.
And so I can't remember where I found it. I don't know if it was probably recommended to me. One of my very like dear teachers is part of this foundation. It's called New Leaf Foundation, and it is basically it's anti-oppression and trauma informed training. That was one of the courses that I took with them.
It was 15 hours, right? Reaching in.
Yes, reaching out is one of their programs that they offer. And essentially what New Leaf Foundation does is they go into marginalized communities, or they go into spaces where like there's people that are incarcerated, or they work with youth that would not normally have access. And so it's really about this, again, this accessibility and coming from a trauma-informed lens, coming from an anti-oppression lens, and understanding what that means, and creating those safe spaces, so to speak. Yes. Understanding that everyone is going to be coming in different every day. Again, we're layered human beings. And so you don't know what that person has gone through. So how can you provide, a practice, a space where that person can just come in, connect to their breath, which even that, like, take some deep breaths. Yeah. That can be triggering for somebody. And so, like, we just think, like, oh, yoga is like, yoga is about, like, breath and, connection to your breath and making these beautiful shapes. And it's like, but that could actually be, like, the complete opposite of what somebody needs that day. So it's hard. It is, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of getting rid of the ego. Yes. Showing up for those people and just, like, really tuning into what it is that they need. So there were some really wonderful lessons in that course. One of the ones that has just always stuck with me has been this anti-oppression lesson from one of my favorite teachers, Jamila, who, funny enough, I met through Cornerstone. Oh. And then, like, circled around into this training with her. And then Amazing. She ended up being in many various other, like, yoga teacher trainings that I've done, which, now, thankfully, I think people are sort of waking up to this and are implementing an anti-oppression part of yoga teacher training.
Great. That's really great to hear.
Yes. Yeah. And, all about inclusive language, all about where you are on that wheel of privilege. Yes. How close you are, how centered you are to, depending on, like, the color of your skin, your sexual orientation, like, how centered are you? And then, working outwards towards, like, the more marginalized groups and understanding what that is within the yoga space. So I'm really grateful to them. I hope to work with them in the future, because it's something that now, again, the older I get, the more experience I have, the more I'm coming to understand myself and how layered I am as a human being, the more I am really understanding, like, we are all coming from these places, and we are all very layered human beings. You don't know what someone else has gone through, and that's where the compassion and the kindness component comes right back into it.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
It always comes back to it.
Beautiful and very needed.
Always. Yeah. It always circles back to this. Like, you have to integrate that into it. Otherwise, like, what are we here for? Like, what are we here for,
Why are we paying all this money to do class and to, like, have a practice and spend our time doing all these things if it's not for wellness, for growth, for making sure that we, not get stuck in the past of what has happened, in our childhood or any other trauma. It's so important that more teachers implement especially inclusive language, which we've talked about, you and I, because I think the most important part of the class is that everyone feels like they can get an experience out of it. Yes. So as guiders of that space and as of that structure, one word that we could say would completely make someone check out 100%. Or feel triggered or feel like they can't have that experience for themselves.
100%. Yeah.
So important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a practice.
Of course.
This is something that I say all the time.
Yes, yeah.
It is a practice.
Evolving as we are.
We are evolving. You are a human being. You are allowed to make mistakes. It's never going to be perfect. Understanding, too, that if there is a mistake made, it's okay to apologize. It's okay to acknowledge that.
Yes.
It's okay to say, like, oh, shit, like, I messed up. I'm sorry that I made you feel that way. I'm sorry that, that it's not about being sorry that you interpreted it that way. I'm sorry that it made you feel that way, right? And again, when you are in a place of being a leader, when you are in that place of like being a teacher, being an educator, because that's, that's what you and I do. It is that much more important to leave the ego out of it and understand that it really truly is not about you. And that can go into anything, right? Like that can go into your dance rehearsal, like you are, you're producing a show right now. Like there's so many different roles where like you have to understand that like it's not about your shit. If you are showing up in that space as someone who is creating that space, who is in that role of like leader, mentor, educator, whatever it is, it's not about you.
Nope, it's not.
It's not about you.
If it is about you, then you need to reassess why you're in the teacher position.
Right.
Because go back to being the student then, right?
Yes.
Like, that's totally fine to make it about you, but I would question why you decided you need to be at the front of the room. Because, like...
Yeah.
I also have a philosophy that, like, every student can't be a teacher.
Yes.
Some people just don't have that skill.
Yes.
And I was lucky enough to grow up in literally a house of teachers.
Right.
So I saw firsthand, like, when it started to become like an ego trip, and I try to question my own self in that all the time. Just because, again, like it's so much money to be taking class and like to put yourself through going to that space as a student. Why are we doing this? And what kind of language do we use to make sure that it doesn't feel like there's a wall between the students and teacher?
Yeah, and it makes me think too, like, I'm like, okay, what are other spaces where it's like, if you are in theater, like you want to be working with a director that has compassion for the people that they are directing.
Oh my gosh,
if you're working like on a set, like you want to, like, it's a team, right? Like no one is more important. Yes, like shit needs to get done. So like we gotta, we have to like tick off all of those boxes if we want to produce something.
Yes.
However, like there also needs to be an understanding that like you're working with human beings. Like you're working with complex creatures. Like we're not robots. Like, so I think it's really important to just acknowledge that and understand that. So it's a lot. Like it's a lot.
And if we don't have space
to
like think about it,
yes.
I feel like when I get really tired, I start to slip back into my defaults or like my autopilots of like saying guys or things that were ingrained in me when I was young, because I feel like this change maybe started only happening in 2020, maybe possibly before that, but when I was still in school, I still felt like I had to be one thing, or I felt like I in some classes couldn't thrive because of the teacher, because of the environment that was created.
Right.
So it really hasn't, in my experience, been that long that we've been able to make these changes, which means it's going to still need to be worked and practiced, but
But it's going in the right direction.
Yes.
It's going in the right direction. And even, let's talk about, University X.
Toronto Metropolitan University.
TMU, thank you. Just that alone, this institution has decided to pave the way and make this change, this shift, and listen to the people that, this name was harmful to.
Yes.
Like, we're going in the right direction. It's not easy work. It's really not. But once you have that awareness, like, are you going to then make that choice to not make those changes?
Yeah, like if you're
then
behind,
it's a decision.
Yeah. You got to come with us.
Yeah.
Because we're all going.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
or at least I think the people that I want to be around.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
They're going.
The creatives are going in the right direction. The artists are going in the right direction because we understand
exactly
the humanity behind it,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, it's just like it just kind of keeps circling back to that. So
yeah, we do have to finish up soon. This is incredible. I can't even believe how long we've been going. But I wanted to just end with a little bit of like a year end, because we just finished up our dance season of teaching at Cornerstone Studio and at other studios. Just all of the ups and downs that we've been through in this year. Like I'm curious to know about how you've overcome those challenges. And I know it's a big question.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I could start. I feel like there's so much adapting that we had to do this year, and patience about our growth. Relatively, I think this year I found to be less about making sure my students got to the next level, and more about where are they now and how can we stabilize that practice so that they don't lose their dedication and their want to grow. Yeah. Because if I found that if I went too much into like, let's do the next thing, keep going up, I started losing people's interest.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And you know, Bri, like that just to me speaks to like your growth as an educator, your growth as a teacher, and like it's everything that we just talked about is like leaving the space for that. I think that's the name of the episode actually. Like there's something around that.
Totally. Yes. That's the quote.
It's a great question. It's a great question because I think it also speaks to like, okay, what has my growth been like? And then therefore like how has that translated into the growth of my students?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think for me, there was a very big realization, and I think I've always known this, but I think it was very much amplified this year of like the responsibility of this role of educator, and the responsibility of using my voice to start to implement these changes. I noticed it a lot when comp season started, when I stepped into adjudicator role. You know, I really, really like that whole like inclusive language episode came out for me because I was like, we need to talk about this and we need to really, really talk about this. And we all need to start doing this because I work with students who identify as trans. Now I actually have these kids in my spaces. Why are we leaving them out? You know, and it's happening. It is happening. So I think that was like a big part of it was like, okay, well now I have all of these different teachers that have shown me these things that have opened my eyes. What am I going to do about it? How am I going to now implement this into my role as an educator, and make sure that I'm practicing what I preach. Like I have to start doing that now. And I can't be afraid of doing it. You know, I think there's these conversations within, like, I know, like, especially in like the judging world of like, well, you know, I'm of a different generation. Like this is, you know, this is something that is like new to me. And it's like, well, you better hop on board because this is where we're going. Exactly. You know, even like beautiful things that I'm seeing is like now like these like the kids coming out with tights that are their skin tone, with ballet slippers that are their skin tone, like giving them those choices. It's like, you know, it's so beautiful to see. So let's keep going that way. Another discussion that has come up so much this year is like, we also need to be like child psychologists, like literally navigating the emotions of our students as they have been moving through COVID. I made sure to like give so much praise and acknowledgement to all of the teachers anytime I had the chance to like go go up on stage and kind of speak as from like a judge, you know, I was just like, your teachers also went through that with you. Like for educators to have been able to like have the bandwidth to come up with creative practices to keep kids engaged. So, you know, just it was a lot. It was a lot.
A lot of uncertainty about if we were actually going to make it to competition.
Yeah.
So the training was different, I found. Because it was like, yes, we have to make sure we're comp ready, quote unquote comp ready. But at the same time, like, what if we don't go to comp? How can we still feel like we've gotten a fruitful experience out of it?
And what if you just took that whole element out of it? Yeah. And we just were here for the joy of it.
Exploring
and like,
our performance again.
Exactly, yeah. And huge. I will say, you know, there was definitely, I certainly felt a shift when I was judging. And you know, taking our kids to competitions as well, I really did feel a shift this year that I think everyone, maybe not everyone, but there was very much this mindset of like, we are back on stage. Let us be grateful for that.
Yes,
we're
enough.
Here.
Yeah.
We're together.
Yeah.
Let's be grateful for that. And
there's gonna be winners. There's gonna be, you know, second place, whatever, but
I kept reminding the kids, like, remember this feeling, like that moment when you know you're about to go on stage.
Yes.
Do you think you can just like keep that with you forever? Yeah. Because that's what this is about.
So precious.
Yeah.
Like to know that we've been away from it and now we get to be back in it. And like, it's so sad when we couldn't work towards a competition or work towards a recital or some kind of performance, because like that's what it's all about, is it being able to share what we've worked on.
Yes.
And I saw it in my students when they, you know, when they started feeling down about their performance again, like going back to like 2019 standards of like, oh, I didn't win. And it's like, well, you know what? You made it here.
Yeah.
That is a feat of itself.
Yes.
Those skills that they're going to develop, overcoming that fear of going on stage and being themselves. Yeah. I mean, it's something that I thoroughly needed when I was a kid, and I hope that more dance students and performance students of any kind don't forget about why it's important to do that and to train like that. Yeah, it's just reminding ourselves why we're doing what we do.
Yes, yeah.
Is it for the medal or is it just for the experience?
Yeah. Just coming back to that, I cried so much this season. Yeah. Like, I literally was just like a huge ball of emotion because I was like, you're back on the stage.
Right? Like that's enough. Yeah.
And then the graduates were what got me, you know, because I was like, y'all saw your friends really not get to graduate, really not get to do like their final bow on stage. And I really saw that in them. I was like, you are not taking this for granted, because the way that you were coming out here and literally just like pouring everything out onto the stage. It was just like so beautiful to see. So I think, you know, there's been a lot of growth. I do hope that this shift kind of stays, and I think I hope it's a reminder also to those teachers, to those studio owners, the competition directors, that there's that reminder there of like, remember why you started. Yes. Remember why you're doing this. You know, remember to include everyone in this, because there's enough space for everyone. There's enough room for everyone. We can find, and you know, we're talking dance competitions right now, but this is for any and every space, any create whatever it is that you're doing. Like, there's room for everyone. There's room for joy if you just keep coming back to why you're doing it, why, you know, how you're implementing that compassion component, and how we can continue to move forward with all of the things that we've learned over the past 2 years. Oh yeah. You can't go back now. No. There's no going back. Like, we have to keep pushing forward, and integrating all of that knowledge and those experiences now into all of your work.
Yeah, and we get to do it together. Thank you for that. Praise be.
Praise be. Yes.
Charlene, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you for inviting
so
me. We definitely could have done like a 4-hour episode so easily.
We're getting close.
So easily. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Where can people find you?
Everything is through my website. You can find everything on my website, which is just charlenedinger.com. I've got my YouTube channel. You can look up my name or The Compassionate Creative. If you want to try some yoga classes with me, all of that is obviously there.
They're incredible.
For free. So yeah, that's you can find me everywhere. So thank you so much for having the space for me to be able to share. It's always so nice to like, again, be on this side of it, but it's two-sided. So
anytime. We'll have more chats, I'm sure.
Yes, we will. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Art Versations podcast. Please help the podcast community continue to grow by clicking subscribe or follow on your podcast platform and leave a review. As well, follow the podcast on Instagram at ArtVersationsPod. You'll find photos of the guest you just heard, plus highlights and quotes from each episode. Let's keep the Art Versation going. Send in a DM with your thoughts about art and any questions you might have for guests. Special thank you goes out to Jen Marquez and Maxim Bartnowski for their contributions. And thank you, listener. Till next time.